I often get asked what size do I prefer, and I always say that's quite subjective. Of course, I'm referring to 24 and 27 inch monitors. I'm not sure what you had on your mind. Now here we've got the P2723D and the P2423D. Now they're both identical, whereby they operate on a 1440p 60Hz IPS panel and have got very similar features. So indeed, in this review we've been comparing the two sizes to see what fits best, and of course to see if they're actually worth their price tag. So to kick off, I do want to talk about pixel density, which is often referred to as pixels per inch, or PPI for short. And no, we're not talking about any sort of insurance claims. Now, given both monitors operate on a 1440p resolution, it's no surprise to learn that the smaller size monitor has a higher PPI. Now it's got a 23.8 inch form factor to be more specific, and that gives it a PPI of 123.41, as opposed to the 27 inch variant that sits at 108.79. So what does this mean when it comes to real life applications? Well, when you're sat at a normal distance between the 24 or 27 inch monitors, there's no such issue at 1440p. Indeed, here the pixel density is actually quite ideal at 27 inch, and I would argue to say 24 inch is actually a bit too small, given that the actual Windows default scaling sits at 125%. You can of course set it to 100% on Windows scaling, but then the overall text becomes just a bit too small, at least in my opinion. Now of course here I'm referring to two 1440p monitors, and if I were to drop the resolution to 1080p, suddenly the 24 inch form factor takes the cake. And the reason behind that is because the text clarity and the sort of pixelation becomes a little bit more noticeable on the 27 inch 1080p form factor. Still, some people would argue that a larger size monitor works better for them, and that's because you've got better productivity, or indeed a better visual experience, because you're consuming a lot more media on a larger size monitor as opposed to a smaller one. So following on from pixel density, we get onto image quality, and here I was actually quite surprised to see that the 24 inch form factor actually does better across the board. Now when put across my calibrators, I noticed an average delta of 2.04 and a maximum of 5.06. You can see at the top how it does across the board. Now if we switch to the 27 inch form factor, you can see there's a lot more red or indeed errors. Here the average delta E drops to 2.81, whereby higher is worse, and for the maximum delta E sits at 5.83. Both monitors have a similar gamut coverage and gamut volume, so there's nothing to report over here. As for the peak brightness, it does differ, including to what Dell claim, where the 27 inch form factor gets to a peak of 300 nits and a minimum to 33 nits, while the 24 inch form factor sits at 263 nits and a minimum of 32 nits. Now as for the measured white point, the 24 inch monitor was a little bit off, and same was in terms of its tested contrast ratio, where it's set to 6348 Kelvin at 100% and 891 to 1, although its gamut coverage was pretty accurate and it was pretty much on point. Now as for the 27 inch form factor, the measured white point is very close at 6513 Kelvin at 100% and a slightly better tested contrast ratio at 1011 to 1, although here you can see its gamut curve is completely off, and it's quite surprising to see how far it is off from the 2.2 tested gamma curve. Similarly, a smaller size monitor also has better uniformity and lowered backlight bleed. Given that we're talking about IPS panels here, I thought it's quite relevant. Here you can see that the uniformity on the 24 inch monitor was not too bad, and then on the 27 inch monitor was still perfectly acceptable, although you can see it's a little bit off in terms of the corners. I do appreciate this is somewhat panel lottery. As for backlight bleed, you can see over here on the 27 inch form factor that it's a little bit more noticeable around the corners, whereas a 24 inch form factor has a little bit more of a uniform backlight bleed. So with all of that in mind, I was very much curious to put it through its paces when it comes to gaming. Now I appreciate both these Dell monitors are not gaming centric. They don't offer the gaming features such as AMD FreeSync or Nvidia G-Sync among other features, and equally are 60Hz 1440p IPS monitors, not exactly ideal. Nevertheless, here I had the input lag tested on the 27 inch form factor at 3.2 milliseconds, while the 24 inch form factor was tested at 3 milliseconds. I'd just like to thank Simon from TFT Central and Adam from PC Monitors for their input with my test, and yes, pun intended, because without them I wouldn't be able to get that sort of figure. Now as for the overall overdrive settings, you've got normal and fast only. Suffice to say, the differences between 27 and 24 inch are absolutely identical. There's no difference here when it comes to my own perceivable response time tests. In terms of the UFO test, you might be able to see a little bit of extra purple trailing in terms of the fast mode preset, but frankly this doesn't really depict the real life experience that I attained. In other words, in the fast mode preset, both the 27 and 24 inch form factors were unplayable, so much so that I had to dial it down to the normal preset. And indeed over here, objectivity only goes so far, so what about when it comes to my subjective input? Now here I just felt that my overall performance on the 27 inch form factor was absolutely perfect. I was actually really surprised for dropping over 85 kills on deathmatch. I know it's not exactly something to be proud about, but at a 27 inch 60Hz form factor I was expecting to do far worse, but indeed that was not the case. And in fact my performance on a 24 inch form factor seemed to be a little bit worse, despite the monitors having the same sort of response time and the same sort of input lag. Suffice to say, this is very subjective yet again. I seem to be gravitating towards the 27 inch 1440p factor because that's what I'm used to. My main monitor is a 1440p 144Hz 27 inch monitor, and it's no surprise here that my eyes and my overall perception and even muscle memory was more suited to a larger size monitor. Of course yours might differ from mine because you might be the complete opposite, whereby you actually prefer a smaller size monitor, and as such your performance might actually be better or superior on a 24 inch form factor. And finally, as I am doing a review of these monitors, I should just reiterate that they're not gaming centric. While they provide a fantastically low input lag given their refresh rate and their overall resolution, I do still think that if you are a gamer and you're looking for a 1440p monitor, you should look elsewhere. There'll be some suggestions down in the description below for your consideration. Here these monitors do come in at a 27 inch form factor, so that's the only thing to be mindful of, because it's been a long time since I actually reviewed a 1440p 24 inch gaming monitor. Now, quick note on the monitor's OSD, that can be accessed through a physical joystick found behind the monitor, which makes it quite convenient. And here you'll find brightness and contrast. You can select the different inputs, and as for the color modes, you've got a few different preset modes, whereby custom color also gives you RGB inputs, although I suspect most will be probably using the standard mode preset. As for the display, you've got the response time setting over here, whereby you want to select between normal and fast. Do bear in mind what I mentioned about the fast preset and the overshoot that you'll get. And as for the personalize over here, you can actually also disable the power button LED that can be found towards the front of the monitor. As for the others section, you can also check the display information and also run a self-diagnostic, which is quite useful for checking for dead pixels. Now with the OSD section out of the way, I should just mention that the overall stand and the design of the monitor is absolutely faultless, both on the 27 and 24 inch form factor. Here you've got a three-side borderless look with a very thin bottom bezel, and as for the stand itself, it provides height, tilt, pivot and rotation adjustments, meaning that you can find the right ergonomics no matter what sort of setup that you run. So with all that information that you've hopefully soaked up throughout this video, be it if you're looking at a comparison between 24 and 27 inch, or indeed if you are looking to know the differences between these two Dell monitors, what I will say is that they're both pretty spenny. Now here the 24 inch form factor can be found for around £280, while the 27 inch model can be found for around £340. At this price point, I just think that Dell should have offered more, be it in terms of connectivity options, be it via USB Type-C, or indeed better color accuracy. Here there's some other monitors out there on the market that either offer both of these or indeed a combination of these and provide a little bit of a superior experience at 1440p. And there are ones from BenQ or Philips or even Lenovo to choose from. They'll be down in the description below for your consideration. Now elsewhere, I will say that subjectivity, I'm still sticking to 27 inch 1440p because I still think that's the sweet spot. There will be some people undoubtedly that will prefer 24 inch, and as a result this Dell monitor that I have in front of me is somewhat of a rarity. So I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below as to which monitor size you would pick, and or your opinions about these Dell monitors if you were just coming for the review side of it. Now if you've liked this detailed video and want to see more from myself, definitely do drop a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification. And if you've done that already, I just want to thank you in advance. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.